Can you still see it? Okay.
Yeah, we'll just keep it.
Should have brought my tablet in.
Check 1, 2, mic check. Good. We have the omnidirectional mic live. Thanks for joining and for being here, you gentlemen. I really appreciate you guys coming into the study, if you will.
Thanks for having us.
No, my pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're really just and there's the chat is open. So if you needed to just maybe comment if you can't hear us or if there's some technical issues. I haven't been able to get on 5G just yet. Still praying about it. So we'll see if the 4G is adequate for now. But so thank you so much for being here, y'all. This is the channel is Exalted Dialectics that was kind of the brainchild of Josh and myself when we were hanging out at Paradise Canyon, just talking about stuff and books and whatnot. So James and I had chatted, I guess, last week here, and we're deciding to maybe put some of these conversations on wax and maybe go live for people, and also just for maybe historical record, just a lot of these conversations, and
Definitely.
And then Eric, a good friend of James, came out, so happy to connect with you a little bit here.
Absolutely.
and learn. So what you're seeing is something super organic. This is the first time we're meeting.
Yeah.
I think this is the first time y'all are meeting.
Yes.
Also. But we've been friends for almost a decade, and about a decade also. So this is going to be fun. Really just kind of a flexible discussion, but one that will be pretty serious, I imagine, as we continue to move forward, pertaining to sacred scripture and books, the book of books, as it were. I think that's something that unites us all here, is a deep-seated passion for truth and for questions and an ongoing inquiry. And so by way of introduction, we can chat a little bit maybe about ourselves, just to give everyone some color, so that we're not completely strangers. We're complete strangers. So I professionally I work in finance and investments, which I never thought I'd be involved with, because I always thought that mammon was something you want to stay away from. But that's if it's gotten through if it's ill-gotten, which is to say, right? So certainly you can make money and save it and invest it and do it well and with prudence. And so I'm happy to have been called into that kind of a vocation field to help people out. But certainly I've been interested in philosophy and theology for as long as I can remember. Had a nervous breakdown 8 years old, asking my mom, what happens after you die? And so the memories
Never recovered.
And in fact, I'm still recovering to this day. But certainly got into to philosophy and theology, raised Catholic, and actually taught Sunday school. Catechism, and really got heavy into that. I went to Central Catholic, which is a private school here in town, and from there, just was still seeking, still trying to figure out what life had in store for me. Eventually, because I was in my early 20s and was heavily radicalized and heavily based in kind of an identity, super committed to identity, fell into studying with Hebrew Israelites. And most people know Hebrew Israelites from, unfortunately, from the CNN or Fox News or media coverage, where you have groups of Black and brown people in America who are committed to an idea that the 12 tribes of Israel are scattered throughout North, Central, and South America. And so there's a lot of archaeology and anthropology that the Hebrew Israelite sort of schools, not all of them, but at least the one I was sort of brought up in, was really focused on ethnicity and the history of peoples and cultures throughout North, Central, and South America. Also thinking about the plight of Black and brown people, and that the Bible would then be some kind of some kind of a historiographical answer to a lot of the questions of why races kind of endure what they're enduring, right? Deuteronomy 28 was brought up quite a bit. So studying with Hebrew Israelites for many years, taught, open schools, lived in Atlanta, doing that kind of stuff. Decided I needed to finish my formal education, so got into Harvard through the extension school, graduated with a bachelor's in 2018 with a minor in psychology, and I wrote a thesis on blockchain technology, so I got into fintech also. But during the time, also through learning how to critically think, which is ultimately, I think, what we're going to be getting into a little bit. The most important thing for me was really kind of deconstructing the premises of a worldview, particularly my own. And in doing so, really opened up a vista and a horizon of just being very open to new information, contrary information. And so I would say that I haven't lost any kind of commitment to my Christianity or to my sense of the truth of the Bible, but my mind is not so funneled into one sort of identity movement anymore. That said, over the years, I should also mention that I do a fair amount of Socratic seminars around the city with the Great Books Committee for the San Antonio Public Library Foundation. We're currently reading the Pre-Socratics. We've gone through Nietzsche. We've gone through Shakespeare. So super into like the Great Books movement, super into having great discussions, which is ultimately why I think this is going to be very fruitful, and I'm really excited to kind of engage with you all. So take it away, Josh.
I think you said everything, but I don't know if you said your name. You want to say your name?
Yeah, my name's Charles Maciano.
There we go.
Sorry.
We needed that.
That's right.
Yeah. So my name is Joshua Kinnell. I grew up in Bernie, Texas. I lived there my whole life. I'm the oldest of 8 children. So came from a lower income family. My dad, hunted and fished, and we got a lot of our food that way and stuff. But I was always taken care of. We were always blessed. Today I'm trying to continue his legacy. I have 4 children. My wife's got another one on the way right now. So it's awesome. It's a blessing. As far as my education goes, I went to Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. I graduated very high up in my class. I have Jewish studies degree. So everybody in Moody sort of graduates with a degree in Bible, but you have different emphases and stuff. So my emphasis was Jewish studies. I've had a heart for Hebrew culture, Israelite culture ever since I was younger. Started teaching myself Hebrew back in high school, been studying it ever since. And I would say that nowadays I'm probably considered what would be called like the Hebrew roots movement. And I've been a teacher of the Bible for many, many years, but I'm teaching now still at a congregation, and I've done a lot of teachings, have some of my teachings online, different things like this. But man, I'm all about the book. It's what I'm into. I love studying. As soon as Charles said, hey, we're going to have some dialogue about this, I'm like, look, I'm in. So I've known Charles for a while. We met when I was working at North Star Mall, and man, we hit it off right away. And for many, many years, I've had incredible discussions, and I sort of brought forth the idea like, man, we need to record these conversations. Every single conversation we have is mind blowing to me. So I started just doing this, on my phone and stuff. And my job now, I got a lot of driving time, a lot of windshield time. So it's fun for me to be able to go back and listen to different conversations. And working at the mall introduced me to lots of different people, lots of different ideas. And so I'm excited to be here with y'all guys today and see where it goes. So.
Awesome.
My name is Eric Harris. I am I say I'm first a husband and father. I was raised Christian in Southern California, and I've been practically every stripe of Christian that you can name. I went to Methodist churches. My primary, education in Christianity was in a Wesleyan tradition. Of course studied the Great Awakening and all the happenings around that. Later went into Foursquare, Assemblies of God Baptist, and Presbyterian. I met James and I have known each other for a number of years, and really kind of galvanized around Calvinist teachings and particularly the doctrines of grace. And I've always had a very skeptical won't say skeptical, but I will say, I'll say I had an internal conflict with what I saw in churches, right? Because I'd been a part of many. What I saw in churches and what I saw in the New Testament. And I think that's really the point of James and I's relationship. But even after that, I found myself being more and more scrutinizing on the latter texts, in light of the former texts. And that is where, I've come to the position that I'm at now. And I've been here probably for a good 6 years, 4 or 5, at least 5 years.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah. So, I'm excited to have the dialogue. Absolutely. My first time meeting both of you. So,
It's already been a pleasure. It's already been a pleasure.
Absolutely. We'll see where the conversation goes.
You could just tell when the wheels are moving in somewhere, if there's actually someone behind the wheel. That's the impression I got there. So glad you're here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I'm James Watts, and I'm fortunate to be the only one that knows all of the members of this group here. I'm a father of 4 and a husband of 9 years last month. So, we got something special for the 10th year, so if anyone's throwing any donations my way, let me know. So my story, I'll summarize it. I was not really raised religious. My parents would probably claim to be religious on some level, but it was more nominal. And I would go to church on my own on occasion. I was really, really, as a child, just ensconced in ontological philosophy. Even if I really didn't know what the terms were at the time, being and how do we know what's what, and just questioning authority and the justification for everything that we were doing. But everybody thought I was crazy, so I couldn't have those conversations with my peers normally. And it really led me to the church, is what it really did. And I was really fascinated because of that with the church, because to me, the only ontos that seemed reasonable to me was God. God had to be the foundation of it all, to have a prime mover, if you will, to start everything. And so I was in the church, and I would go on my own, and I was exposed to all different types of Christianity. Most people that I was around didn't seem to have that interest in the finer points of doctrine, or even really understanding what the beliefs were. I think of Dr. John MacArthur says, in the early days, people would organize over a common theology, and nowadays people organize more over a common methodology. So, so many churches people are non-denominational nowadays because the finer points of doctrine don't really matter, whether you're Methodist, Episcopalian, Lutheran, or you're, whatever it is. Y'all can all go to the same church because you're not going to have those discussions about whatever the differences between those denominations are. But I cared about those denominational, technicalities, those nuances. And so I would always read the Bible. I was always probably, heavily interested in literature and how to understand from sentence structure and figurative language. I was always fascinated. I was a rapper. I was a battle rapper. And so I'd read the Bible, and I would look around at the church that I was in, and I would say, well, it seems like people aren't really taking this thing as seriously as I'm being initiated into this religiosity. I'm thinking they're not taking it as seriously as the Bible is saying you should take it. Not that I'm actually living it. I'm just saying that it doesn't seem like anybody really understands what's in here. And over the time, I watched a message by a message called The Truth Behind Hip Hop from a guy named G. Craig Lewis at Fort Worth. And he was really just saying that, how people say that they're Christian, but everything about them is anti-Christ. And that just really hit me when he said that. People say they're Christian, but everything about them is anti-Christ. And it really hit me that was me. That was me. And I repented and turned to faith in Christ at that time. And that was 2006. I just finished my first year in college. And I was radically different. Went to the school, told all my friends, hey, I don't battle rap anymore. I don't do this. I don't do that. Told girls, no, I'm not interested. And they're like, you must be gay. And I didn't know what I was talking about. It was just out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks at that point in time. And so I started going to a Pentecostal church, and I very Pentecostal. They spoke in tongues. They prophesied. They interpreted tongues. They would pray for healings and various different points of time. And everything was great. I loved the pastor. He treated me really good. But as I kept reading the scriptures, I'm thinking in my head, like, it says to keep silent if there's no interpreter. And we don't have any emphasis on the gospel. And he had the Bible 5 software, I think it's called. And so he had access to all this historic Christianity, but we weren't utilizing it. We didn't utilize any of it. So for about 4 years, I was kind of ostracized in that church as being kind of radical, a little out there, didn't really fit in too well. And then I was downtown getting my haircut from my stepdad. And this little short Hispanic guy came in there with some cards and stuff like that. And, I thought that was pretty odd that he would be willing to come in there. And that's how I said, well, I was very evangelical at the time. So I was like, when I get done getting my haircut, I'm going to go find this guy and talk to him.
Yeah.
And so I got my haircut. I went out there, and as I'm going to try to approach them, they're barbecuing, about a football field length away. And as I'm walking towards them, it's a group of 3 of them walking towards me. And so I'm thinking I'm getting ready to, share with them with the word and, help them to understand that the modern day Christianity we're involved in is superficial and a mile wide and an inch deep. And they started asking me questions that were basic questions that I really couldn't answer readily. They were like, how do you know if you're a Christian? I'm like, that's a good question. and then they could have destroyed me theologically at that point if they really wanted to. But they say, hey, come over here. We're barbecuing over here. I think they got some sense that I was a genuine Christian. And so they say, hey, there's this sermon about this guy named Paul Walsh. You should check it out. And I was like, I listen to 100 AM all the time. That's all I ever do is listen to 100 AM. So, I'm pretty sure I've heard that. You should listen to this guy. And I'm referring to the guy who I got saved through his ministry. So check this guy, Paul Washer, out. So I played it the first time, and the first 3 minutes, it was a little bit, too much, feeling in it, the way he was praying. And I was like, I don't know about this. But I said, let me go and give it a shot. Listen to the whole thing. And my life shifted. I went through the rabbit hole of the Reformation and came out 5-point Calvinist at the end of it all. And at that moment in time, I was sharing with everybody that I can, not only about how important the scriptures were, but a proper understanding of the scriptures and, the 5 points, in a proper soteriology. And that's pretty much where I am now.
That's good.
And so,
That's awesome.
James Watts, father with 4 kids.
There's 2. I don't know if you mentioned that you were. I am too. I feel bad I didn't say that for. But,
you don't have to feel bad, bro.
If you wouldn't mind, grab me that phone right there that's plugged in. Hopefully it's yeah. Just hand it to me, please. Or trying to charge it just so if anyone wanted to tune in on IG Live, they can. Because I was trying to hype people up to get the audience going. So
next time we'll be able to actually all disseminate it through.
Yeah, well, hopefully we can.
Platforms.
Yeah, of course. I really just wanted to really. I think when you initially start kind of podcasting, if you will, or what I've been calling a thought cast. I'll put that right there. Thought casting is what I've been calling it. But
sounds kind of new age. I don't know.
I know we might need to rethink that. But ultimately, I think this go around was more of a rough sketch to kind of get a feeling of if we wanted to move forward, how we would do that.
Yeah,
absolutely. And as you all know, oftentimes when you're in serious discussions with people, listening is so much more important than talking. But even that requires practice, right? So that's and so that's kind of what I think we're probably going to be working on. But my hope is that moving forward is that our friendships would get even much more enriched from these types of interactions and heartfelt thoughts. So that said, I wanted to offer. So I did wake up at like 6:30 a.m. Hadn't done that in a while. I woke up today. I normally wake up like at 8. So when my daughters wake me up because I stay up so late reading. But I woke up because I wanted to kind of write a little bit and kind of cue us up with some opening introductory remarks. Hopefully you all would indulge me as I do that, because I've fashioned the remarks as a launch pad to launch us into something. Now I know that offline, we can jump into anything. We talked about this all. There's infinite amounts of entry and exit points here. But hopefully we can move forward, and I'll just go ahead and read what I wrote, because I think it's very appropriate considering the kind of stress and uncertainty that people are feeling right now. So also, one thing I didn't want to do is be overly abstract with this and overly theoretical. I mean, obviously, we're going to be touching on theory, we're going to be touching on theology, we're going to be touching on high level things. But what's really important to people right now is, I think, ascertaining some sense of certainty. And so with that said, I'd love to just jump into this. So, so these are the times that try men's souls. Words appropriate for the late 18th century, as they are for the modern America which was to follow. No doubt, the celebrated American thinker Thomas Paine, in writing these words in his pamphlet aptly titled The American Crisis, during the days of the American Revolution, was in fact courageous enough to explore his own politically unstable times. Paine's era was an era which found its spirit oppressed in explicit English monarchical tyranny, taxation without representation, organized militias, the tragedy of slavery, deplorable treatment of indigenous Americans, conflicting religious sentiments. And yet, in the midst of this social chaos, Paine opened his now legendary treatise with a statement regarding the trying of the soul. Now, one might pause to consider, within a world in which the soul is but a mere religious antique to be observed and considered for purchase among the vast marketplace inventory of ideas, products bought and sold. Perhaps the reason why the notion of the soul itself has been relegated to museum status is precisely because its price is too great to purchase. One quick search for a clear definition of the soul might be found in the English Oxford Dictionary as the principle of intelligence, thought or action in a person typically regarded as an entity distinct from the body, the essential, immaterial, or spiritual part of a person or animal, as opposed to the physical. Moreover, the soul might also be defined as the seat of a person's emotions, feelings or thoughts, the moral or emotional part of a person's nature, the central or most inmost part of a person's being. Perhaps all of human history has been one immense unfolding of a chronology specifically designed to try the human soul, a furnace to test the purity of our intelligence, that the dross might descend to the bottom, separating its worthlessness from the immeasurable value of a mind more like gold or platinum, precious in its rarity, clarity, and its brilliance. Today, in the wake of a global pandemic and the tragic killings of Black Americans, events which, taken together, have not only destabilized global balance on economic and social levels, these events have impacted, I might argue, and perhaps even impressed upon our souls an almost unutterable sense of profound unsoundness in ourselves, which is to say, our souls, ourselves, are not in good condition. We've been damaged, injured, and altogether not in any condition to judge or monitor the conditions of our lives. We're experiencing a disorder of almost cosmic proportions, while desperately attempting to make some sense out of what has proved a senseless age. Assuming that disorder is in fact the order of the current spirit of the world, where is one to seek for a reordering, a reestablishing, a replanting, as it were, of the seeds of one's soul? How is one to reground one's soul within the hyper exchange of data, information across news networks, countless social media channels? How is one to discover truths in an age of fake news, alternative facts, and radical subjectivity? And perhaps a more important question is, why should one even seek a reordering or a regrounding in the first place? In a world where the ideas of institutions, establishments grounded in fixed foundational principles and visions, have collapsed beneath particular and individual failure, failure to adhere to core values, failure to uphold governing principles, and perhaps most egregiously, failure to embody integrity in both thought and character. To where and to what is one to turn towards to find firm confidence? Where can one turn towards to find a sound compass to offer some sense of directionality, whereby one might guide their lives through the maelstrom of a memeified reality, data-driven noise, information overload, social media burnout, internet addiction, and ward off the ominous approach of an all-consuming soft nihilism? Last paragraph. Words themselves, as Paine proved in his Revolution-era pamphleteering, became forces of nature to arouse, to inspire, and incite the human spirit towards liberatory ends and self-empowerment. Conversely, words can reinforce oppression, imperialism, and brute conquest. The purest articulation of will to power may be found in books and documents across time, hammering in one's consciousness a monolithic perception of reality, while demanding unquestioning obedience to the intrepid doctrines of self-inflated authors who eventually become the self-appointed arbiters of reality itself. Which leads me to my question. Why is the Bible still relevant? Can it be trusted? Is it consistent? And among the disparate views, opinions, and beliefs regarding its authority and canonicity, is it true?
That was a good intro, Charles.
Thank you.
Thanks, man. Well said.
Thank you.
So, James, you kind of orchestrated this and brought it all together. I think you were having a dialogue with Eric, and you wanted us to get together because you had a particular topic that you wanted to touch on, maybe more specifically. But I think we'll dovetail exactly into Charles's questions about, like, why is the Bible still relevant? Is it true? And different things like that. So why did you bring us together?
I think that we can have a really robust discussion exploring some of the perspectives that my good friend Eric here have. I haven't had a chance to do a lot of deep research into what he was sharing. At the time that he and I did discuss it, it was very brief, more topical, a very surface level. And I was very busy. I own a business, and I was really trying to get that off the ground. And I'm still in the process of doing that. It's going pretty well, but it can use a little more work. And so I thought this was a one I felt like I can kind of accomplish, hit, two birds with one stone with doing this approach. One, I can learn a lot more. I've often felt a little out of depth when it comes to conversations really related to, the Torah and to the Tanakh alone. And I believe that y'all two gentlemen probably have a better, given y'all's background, Messianic and Hebrew Israelite, that's a core part of your doctrine. Not so much for my doctrine. It's definitely essential, but not nearly as much, I would say. And we don't discuss that as often in my groups that I normally, circle. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to be able to really engage in all those conversations in a meaningful way where I can learn a lot. Hopefully all of us can learn a lot from it. So that's really was my focus on it.
Yeah. I guess my first thought is that how could it be that in Christianity that the Torah would not be the central part of what might be considered doctrine? In other words, I guess what I'm saying is the Torah, if the New Testament authors were here, mm-hmm. would tell you the Torah is their core tenet. Mm-hmm. It's their core foundation. In fact, Jesus, aka Yeshua, if he were here, he'd say the same thing. He was only teaching from the Torah. So, and that would probably open up into the richness of the discussion. But ultimately, that's one of the kind of key contentions that we've had
Yeah,
over
absolutely.
and then our points of unification were that also. But
I would imagine all three of y'all will have that in common, probably more so than myself.
Oh, I mean, it's kind of like a like a four-way Venn diagram right here.
Yeah,
so I
yeah,
think it's
exactly.
really interesting how this is going to
Absolutely.
overlap, and where we'll find agreement. I think maybe to bring that up. So maybe even before I say this, I think we all agree on at least some sort of scripture, right, that we hold as authoritative. Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so there was a disagreement maybe between y'all two, and I feel like that hasn't surfaced, but that is maybe the purpose for why we're here. So maybe we can bring that up and still tie it into Charles's questions.
Sure.
So
Sure. So I do want to go back to James's statement there. Like I said, I've participated in the Christian church at various levels, and in my experience, I've never, in my own experience or in the experience of anyone that I've witnessed, thousands of people that were Christians for a long time, or thousands of people who have converted to Christianity during my time as a Christian, never have I met anyone who was introduced to faith in, we all believe in the Most High, right? We all believe in the Most High, the creator of heaven and earth. And never have I met that person in the Christian faith that was introduced to him by any means other than the New Testament. That is the entry point. Do you know that you're a sinner? Do you know that you're going to die? Do you know that if you don't accept Jesus Christ, because God so loved the world, that is the entry point. And that is the assumed base of knowledge in all of Christianity, and everything is laid upon top of that foundation. In fact, Peter, upon this rock I will build my church, that you are the Christ. And that is what Christianity is built on.
absolutely.
I'm sorry, upon that you know that I am God, that you know that I am in fact, right? That's the base of Christianity, and that's not the base of the book. Right? The base of the book is that in the beginning, the Most High God, right? And then there's a chronology that's laid out, and it's a beautiful story of a relationship between a creator and his creation, and a repeated apostasy and a repeated rectification and a bringing back, and a Messiah comes repeatedly, and at no time is that ever represented in Christendom. That's not part of Rome's plan for the world as they spread this gospel behind their army.
do you draw a distinction? So you say Rome's plan right there. Do you draw a distinction between what Rome is doing and what the historical person of Jesus Christ was doing?
So I do not speculate on the.
I get that. I'm not asking
sure.
a question that is outside of the text. I'm saying
Sure.
in the New Testament canon as we have it, in the Gospels themselves, do you see the hand of Rome? This is just Rome's ideology being pushed forward, or do you see that there is a person with a message that that joins with what you're saying, or do you see it as I
would say that
counter.
in the first and second century, as the Roman Empire grew, they conquered kingdoms, they conquered people, they conquered tribes and nations, and they assimilated points of belief in order to convert women and children, because the plan was blitzkrieg, right? You kill the women, you kill the men, you rape the women, and you create. It's the same thing that Cortez did, right? It's repeated.
Conquest 101.
Exactly.
Right.
And so that's what Rome did. And when they did that, this is the postulation, right? That they killed the Hebrew Messiah, right? They killed him, and then they said, "Oh, wait a minute, he had some good teachings. Bring that back. Let's take everything that he ever wrote and let's send it to everyone else that we conquered, because we care about their souls, because that's point of fact what happened." Right? That's point of fact what happened. And so we're to believe that this second part of this book that was written over a period of about 50 years by mostly, if you take their word for it, people that knew each other Everyone at some point was in the same room with someone that knew, right? Completely different than Torah Tanakh. Completely different than the 1,500 years through the rise and fall of 4 kingdoms of writers who never knew each other, most of them who grew up in slavery or in some sort of oppression and never had the privilege to read one another, but made prophetic utterance from the voice of God, right? So if this is the claim of the first 39 books, and then you've got this second group of books that do not follow that first, you have to call that into question. If you're going to be intellectually, if you're going to have integrity, you have to call it into question. You have to say, wait a minute, they were all together, right? And hold on, this is under the iron hand of the Roman Empire, and nothing was published at this time unless Rome stamped it. The Flavian family, many of the Flavians went on to become high council. And I trust that you verify that. Absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely. And these are the parascriptural sources that we lean on. Josephus was a Flavian. Other Flavians went on to become popes.
Sure.
So this is, and by the way, John, who is still living at the time of the second pope after Peter. These are things that we have to call into question. If you're going to say that this is not the plan of Rome, you have to have an answer for these questions.
So I guess my early response is to then ask you what you make of the intertestamental texts, otherwise known as the Apocrypha, because I want to be clear that there really wasn't a sort of chasm between Malachi and Matthew. There was, so I know that there is in the Christian consciousness, insofar as they're unconscious of the intertestamental text. However, there is a theme and a bridge that connects, and I think that it's advantageous for the inquirer to walk across that bridge and to see the different shapes that Israel was taking between Malachi and Matthew, and perhaps that even informs the stream of thought into the New Testament.
So you spoke earlier about your love for great books.
Yep.
Right. And there are many
and cognac.
and there are many historic volumes that add value.
Yes.
Right? And that can add color and can add flavor and are yet fallible.
Sure.
Right. And so in that vein, I want us to acknowledge and if we are to follow this book in any iteration, we must first follow the law that was given to Moses.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that is, we don't measure against the Gospels. We don't measure against Maccabees or
Tobit.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. We don't measure against any of those standards. We measure against first Torah.
Sure.
Right. And then the prophets, because those are the witnesses.
Absolutely.
Right. And if it contradicts that, and understanding also even the what we call the Septuagint, the Greek New Testament is not, that's Septuagint is a Greek copy of Torah, and then it became a generic term later, like Band-Aid. You have a Band-Aid, but it may not be made by a Band-Aid company. Right. So you say Septuagint because it's a scripture translated into Greek, but that was not the original text. It was Torah, and Torah is the standard. And everything in Tanakh, we all affirm, agrees with Torah. And so then that is the standard. And if that is not in agreement with something subsequent, then something subsequent is not true.
Okay. So for the sake of pragmatics and to keep us all honest, and I watched a little bit of was it Joseph Atwill? Is that his name? Jacob Atwill?
Not familiar.
Joseph Atwill.
Joseph Atwill, a historian. Well, he's actually more of an entrepreneur that sold a company and then really got into New Testament studies and was really interested in the critique of the New Testament.
Okay.
I have heard this argument before many years ago
Okay.
about the Flavians and whatnot.
Sure.
But I guess to keep us honest, I guess because we can get into the
Oh, I got you. Atwell. I am familiar.
Atwell,
yeah. I am familiar.
But to keep us honest, and this is where the great book Socratic in me
Sure.
comes out, is to say, then perhaps we want to, if this is, I guess, where the natural conversation is headed, perhaps we want to engage texts that you find problematic in the New Testament.
Okay.
That lend to your supposition that it's actually more Roman in nature. And correct me if I'm misunderstanding you, because
Sure.
the commentary you just made is such that it almost sounded like the New Testament was contrived by a Roman shadow hand.
So what I would say is that it is, and this is where I was going to go earlier, that I won't speculate on the authorship of it. Okay. Maybe there were 12 disciples who followed a man, right? And maybe that man was killed by Rome, and maybe Rome believed everything that he said later, and maybe Rome sent that everywhere in the world. Let's assume that that's true.
Okay.
Right. What's of more importance to me is, does that man, by the claims of the book there, does it actually, do those claims fit the Tanakh view of Mashiach?
Well, that's the most important thing anyone could ever talk about.
Correct.
I mean, right? Because you're
Correct.
talking about the fulfillment of the thread of messianic prophecy,
Right.
all the way from Genesis 1:1 through Malachi.
Correct.
And well, I mean, that's the crux of everything. It
Sure.
appears to me.
Right. Yeah. It's just, and to be honest, I think that let's just say that I having, like I said, spent most of my life reading that book, I don't see it there.
Okay.
I don't see it there. Number one, we've got no restoration of Israel, right? No true restoration of Israel. In that, number one, they become a nation again. Israel becomes a nation, and the entire world becomes their student. That is essentially the promise, right? Isaiah 9, I want to say ish. Isaiah 9, right? That there's no more war, there's no more famine, there's no more, we solve all the problems, right? Because we all go to a theocracy, basically. It's the way. Remember when Israel wanted to be like all the nations and have a king? Now all the nations want to be like Israel,
Right.
and they want to have the Most High God.
Sure.
That's the fulfillment, and that's and there's a lot of ways that you can go for.
Well, that's the fulfillment, if indeed that is the fulfillment, if the Old Testament is contained in a vacuum. What I'm saying is that if we were just to read the Old Testament and to think about what the kingdom would be, is
Okay.
kind of like what we're talking about, like that
Sure.
all nations would serve Israel in
Sure.
that regard. So are you saying then that the advent of the Christian Messiah, Jesus Christ, because that type of utopic vision wasn't fulfilled completely, that it casts tremendous holes in the narrative structure of the New Testament?
I would say that not only was it not fulfilled,
Yeah.
but the opposite became true.
Okay.
Right. At the coming of the Jesus man, right? And again, that's theanthropos, right? It's a Greek word, right? It means God man. It's not a Hebrew idea. At no point is the Messiah to be a God. Messiah is a man like Moses, is a man like Daniel, is a man like Hezekiah, who was the holiest man to ever live and was without sin according to Scripture.
So just to be clear, then the actual embodiment of God as such, your argument then is that that's not Hebraic in nature.
It's not.
Okay.
It's not.
Okay.
The idea of a propitiation, that he might be just and the justifier, because you cannot you cannot redeem a man with a sinless man. Each man must pay for his own sin. Now that's dividing a line between saying that I cannot inherit because I will revisit the sins of the father upon the son to the third and fourth generation. Absolutely, you can pay a penalty for sin, but you cannot redeem your father. It's different.
Okay.
Right? So it's the entire crux. Why do I need a new covenant if I have an everlasting covenant?
Well, the new covenant, again, there's so many points being brought up here.
Sure.
I feel like we need to slow down a little bit and maybe just
Sure.
like focus upon,
Sure.
one or two different things. There was a few things that were said, like where like I'm just letting some stuff stand, because it's like, okay, do we want to attack this issue? Do we want to attack
Sure.
that? But I mean, I would just fundamentally argue against that the New Testament is a Roman document that was spread throughout all the earth. I mean,
But
clearly,
it was spread by Rome. You'll agree with that?
No, I won't agree that it was spread by Rome, unless you mean like the Roman Catholic Church, and you're talking about 4th, 5th, 6th century and stuff. But I'm talking about early on, and we know documents were written very, very early. I mean, we have documents of the New Testament from the 2nd century, and you're talking about in the 3rd century, a tremendous persecution by the Roman government against early believers and followers of Christ.
Like they did every other religion,
Okay,
right?
fair enough. But my point is that you can't say that they are the originators of this idea or this ideology when they were the persecutors of an ideology for over 200 serious persecution.
Sure.
So it wasn't until the ideology took foothold within the Roman Empire, and they thought we can't defeat this ideology. That then now I'm going to lean towards your side. Now they say we're going to utilize this ideology, and so with Constantine and the Council of Nicaea and different things like this, I'm with you there.
Okay.
But again, that's where I draw a sharp line. Like, okay, if we want to have a discussion about what's happening after 400 AD, okay, fine, we can have this discussion about Rome and whether Rome was right in its presentation of the Messiah throughout all the world. Okay, that's one argument. But the other argument is that the document, which is a 1st century document, and we know because people are quoting it in the 2nd century, people are quoting it as if they know this document exists, as if it's an authoritative document. It couldn't have just been made up, a few days, a few weeks earlier. It's almost they're quoting it with familiarity and stuff. So I'm not going to subscribe to the fact that the New Testament document is a Roman document that was pushed across all the world. So I would say that at least, hey, we need to figure out which side of this argument we're going to argue. Are we going to argue with what the New Testament as a document actually is saying, and does the New Testament contain Roman ideology that is meant to further establish the Roman Empire, or is the New Testament a Jewish document, thoroughly Jewish document, right? That at this time, because it was a prophesied expectation in the Tanakh that the teachings of Israel would go forth into all the world. I mean, the very covenant that God makes with Abraham, that in you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And not only in you, but in your seed, which I think we can establish just looking at the Tanakh, right, is a messianic concept, that in his seed, in the seed of Abraham, he was going to bless all the families of the earth. So we should, I would say that it's a Jewish expectation that something that has to do with Abraham and one of his descendants would eventually go through all the earth and bless mankind. I would say we agree with that, right? Because that's just a Tanakh value. Now, we can argue, okay, well, is Yeshua the fulfillment of this? Is Jesus the fulfillment of this or not? I mean, that's a different issue. But the idea that teaching goes through all the world,
Sure.
even if it was used by Rome, even if Rome is behind it, which I would say it wasn't, it was clearly taken and spread throughout all the world by the apostles. I mean, you even have pockets of Christianity in India that go back to the Gospel of Thomas, that go back to Thomas, the Apostle Thomas, not the Gospel of Thomas. I misspoke. They go back to the Apostle Thomas. They trace their roots back to one of Jesus's early followers that took the gospel there. So you can't say, okay, well, that's Rome that did that. You know what I mean? Thomas wasn't a Roman, you know what I mean? Does that make sense? I'm just trying to say, I would argue with you against the initial premise. Okay.
I want to say, because I think we're at a fork in the road now. We have to decide what topic we want to. There's Christ in the Old Testament, Tanakh and Torah. There's discussing the Roman
And I'm not really interested. I would much rather go to Messiah and the Tanakh. I mean, that's more interesting for sure.
So I'll defer to Charles, if or anybody.
Well, I mean, so
which way we want to go? I'm fascinated by both topics. I can speak more towards the Roman influence part than I can the other, Jesus in the Old Testament offhand. So
I guess I'm wondering. I mean, so there is a sort of historiologic argument about the New Testament actually being a Roman document.
Sure.
Which I see the argument. But you had mentioned earlier that that the sort of we didn't use the word apotheosis, but the actual the divine being made flesh, God the Most High becoming flesh, is not a Hebraic concept.
Not a Hebraic concept.
So I think that on a level of importance, that probably carries a bit more weight than to think about the historicity of the documents. Not to say that it's not important to get into,
Sure.
Yeah.
But the actual, we've talked about this over the last decade.
We're establishing foundations.
Well, I remember, in terms of my own rearing in Hebrew thought.
Mm-hmm.
Taking again, being raised Catholic and then coming into Hebrew thought, I had broken with the Catholic Church, which is the sort of, which is to say, the universal idea of Christianity, such that God became a man, and I broke with that and said, wait a minute, the Most High is ineffable, unutterable. You don't see him, Yod Vav He, he's beyond. There's no way that he would ever defile his omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence by being trapped in corruptible human flesh.
Right.
However, as I continued to, here's the fork in the road.
Yeah.
As I continued to think it through, from continuing to dip into the New Testament, especially seeing it, and here's the problem: seeing the New Testament as a Hebraic. As a Hebraic collection of writings.
Sure.
Then I was able to rethink that position.
Sure.
So perhaps we want to drill into that, because I know that you've been studying this for many years, and I do want to dive into the text.
Sure.
Yeah.
I do want to get into the scriptures themselves, because it's just us talking otherwise.
Sure. No, and I want that too. But
let me pose this question to you.
Okay, go ahead.
Can you lead us into the Tanakh and talk to us about the can the Most High become flesh? Can he be a man? Is that alluded to in the Tanakh? Because I want to really drill into that. It is this sort of what is the word you called it?
Theanthropos.
Theanthropos.
Right.
Theanthropos.
God becoming man. Incarnation.
Let's call it incarnation.
Well, but it's different because he's supposed to hold a superposition where he is both God and man. It's different than
Incarnation, I think, has that idea too.
Okay.
Because you're speaking about a pre-existence. So to incarnate, you're talking about. But I'm okay with theanthropos if you want to say this too.
Let's use theanthropos.
Okay.
Well, that would be the correct Hellenistic term in the language that it was written.
That's fine. Let's go with that. Theanthropos. Can you talk to theanthropos? The ability, or can you talk to theanthropos in the Tanakh?
Yeah, I think I can, but I do want to, because we had already mentioned this previously, I don't want it to be 3-on-1. So if you have a particular line of reasoning that you would like to go down, because I think in this particular setting, I think you're the odd man out, and I want you to be able to put the first foot forward in the conversation if you wish to. Otherwise, I didn't know what we were going to talk about, so I'm just going to go right into my mind of sort of the Rolodex.
And just to be candid, from my perspective, I feel that I am defending Tanakh.
Yeah,
that's where I feel. That's what I feel. And I feel that you're defending the veracity of the New Testament.
And I don't necessarily want to frame the argument that way, because I'm okay with restating the argument to say, what does the Tanakh actually teach about the Messiah?
Sure.
So if that's a more comfortable way in which to approach it. Like,
Mhm.
where does the Torah bring up the idea of the Messiah? Where does the idea get developed? Where, if you would rather move along those lines and frame it that way, well, then we approach the conversation with a bit of, mutual
Sure.
seeing, like, okay, we're working towards the same end goal as opposed to working against each other.
Sure.
Now, I already have my conclusions. You already have your conclusions,
Sure.
right? But it's up to you. Like I said, I want to
Hand me that Bollinger right there, man. Right there. There you go.
So
get
let
the
me,
whole in there.
if I could, I would like to submit a scripture.
Yes.
Okay. And it's Deuteronomy chapter 13. I'm starting at verse 1.
The prophet.
Yeah. Right. It says, if there arise among you a prophet, or a dreamer of dreams, or a giver of signs or wonder, and the sign or wonder does not come to pass, whereover he spake unto thee, saying, let us go after other gods, which thou hast not known, let us serve them. Thou shalt not hearken to his words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord thy God proveth you. I'm sorry.
No, you're
To know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart or all your soul. You shall walk after the Lord your God and fear him. Keep his commandments, obey his voice, and ye shall serve him and cleave unto him. And the prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has spoken to turn you away from the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you out of the house of the land of bondage, to thrust thee out of the way which the Lord thy God commanded thee to walk in. So shalt thou put the evil away from the midst of thee. If thy brother, thy son's mother, or thy son, or thy daughter, or thy wife, or the wife of thy bosom, or thy friend, which is as thine own soul, entice thee secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which thou hast not known, thou nor thy fathers, namely the gods of the people. And it goes on and on and on. And it basically tells you, don't hide them, don't save them, don't try to convince them, kill them too, right?
Yep.
And the emphasis there in verse 6, at the very end, he says, saying, let us go serve other gods, which thou hast not known, thou or thy fathers. Right, and he's talking about what was taught to Moses, what that which was given to Moses, meaning that Leviticus is exhaustive,
Yeah.
Deuteronomy is exhaustive. The offering of service and the everything, it's exhaustive, and the doctrines are clear. The 613 laws are clear, right?
Sure.
And it says if they say something that was not taught to you or your fathers, meaning this is a closed book. He's saying that there's no room to read into the text.
Sure.
Now, right?
Sure.
So I would submit that and then ask you, please show me this doctrine that was taught to the fathers of the Messiah being God incarnate.
Okay, so again, at least to mention another point of commonality, this is a passage that I quite often go to because I think the way that Yeshua is generally presented to most people makes him to be a false prophet. But if you look at the beginning of the New Testament, you look at Christ's own words, he begins with the phrase, think not that I have come to destroy the law or the prophets. I've not come to destroy the law, but to fulfill them. For I say unto you, verily till heaven away, not one jot or tittle is going to pass from the law until all is fulfilled. And then he's going to go on to say that whoever does it, right, and teaches it is going to be great, and whoever doesn't do it and doesn't teach it is going to be least in the kingdom, right? And he's going to say that our righteousness has to exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. So I would say, to frame the conversation, I don't think when obviously I believe Yeshua's the Messiah, I don't think when the Messiah came, he's teaching anything other than the Torah. I think he makes that clear from the outset. Now, as far as the whole idea or concept of a Messiah, where is it that the Messiah is even taught within the Torah itself, right? I mean, this is actually a more difficult concept to establish. If you were to just read the book from Genesis, the first page of Genesis to the last page of Deuteronomy, I think you'd be hard pressed if you don't know how to study the Torah, right? To get a bunch of messianic concepts that are there in it. But I do believe they are actually rooted in there. So where do you see the Messiah begin to emerge from the Torah itself? I mean, this leads into a fascinating study. And I did a study on Genesis, like 36 hours, right? Just going through the book of Genesis, showing how the messianic idea is developed in the book of Genesis. So it's clearly there. But if you're asking, where is it that you would see the idea of a God man very early on? I would say it's pretty clear. So if you want to go to Genesis chapter 3, right after the fall of mankind, you'll see after man sins, God comes to him and he's going to start meting out some sort of disciplinary action, and in terms of these words that he's going to give to them. And you'll notice that as he speaks to them, that this passage in Genesis chapter 3 is set up like a chiasm. And a chiasm is like the Greek letter X, right? Which means to say, like, when you literarily explain things chiastically, you have a point, like let's say point 1, 2, and 3, and then you're going to move backwards. Mention point 3, then go to 2, and go to 1. And when literature is set up this way, you have the author telling you what the point of it is that he's really driving at. You're going to put some of your most essential meaning right here. And it also gives you the opportunity to interpret the other sides because you get more information. So point 1 will correspond to 1 prime down here, and 2 to 2 prime, and so on and so forth. So you notice that when God comes to mankind and starts to talk to him, he's going to speak to Adam first, then he's going to speak to the woman, he's going to speak to the serpent, he's going to speak to the woman, and then he's going to speak to Adam again, right? So you see there's a chiastic element going on right here. So we're right here in the center of the chiasm. And what is it that he's going to say? Talking to the serpent in verse 15, he's going to say, and I will put enmity, right, which means like hostilities. I'm going to put enmity between you and the woman, talking to the serpent, between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So we have here right at the very beginning the concept introduced of, after mankind sins, that there is an expectation of this seed of the woman who is going to come and actually do judgment, do punishment against the serpent. And in this punishment, you're going to have almost a deadly battle that ensues, one in which the seed of the woman, he crushes the head of the serpent, right? And then the serpent is going to strike at the heel of the man. Okay, so I think one of the more important things we need to keep in mind is, as we're reading literature, we ought to remember what we just read as we move on to the next chapter. I think, the dividing of the Bible into chapters is one of the more unfortunate things that was ever done to the Bible, because it causes us to put breaks in our thinking. So if you have chapter 3 introduce the idea of there being enmity between 2 different seeds, then what should we expect to find in the next chapter? Chapter 4, right? Cain and Abel. And what do you have? You have enmity between 2 different seeds, right? But I want you to look in chapter 4 of what it is that Eve says when she bears Cain. So this is the last thing that God has said to the woman right here. And he's speaking in her ears in the same way that he's speaking into, Adam's ears and the ears of the serpent. But he's promised, hey, there's going to be a seed that's going to come from this woman, right? So go ahead and let's look in chapter 4, verse 1. It's very interesting right here. So I'm just going to look at it in the Hebrew because it's more clear, and you really need to see it that way in order to understand what's going on. But it says, and the man knew at Chava, right, Ishto, his wife, right, and she conceived and she bore at Cain, right, and she said, Kaniti, I have acquired Ish et Adonai, right? I have acquired a man et Adonai.
From God.
Not
Lord,
from
Lord.
God. From God. Look at
Et is
et is the direct object indicator. Now, it can mean with. It can mean with. You can say with sometimes with et. But right here you have et used multiple different times in this context. Now, look at how it said. It said Adam knew. It it says V'hadam, right? And the man yada et Hava, and the man knew et Hava. So the knew, right? The et tells you who he knew. He knew et Hava, right? So it's a direct object indicator. So the verb is acting upon Hava right there. Does that make sense? So he knew Hava, right? His wife, and she conceived and bare et Cain, right? So she bare et point Cain, right? She bare Cain. And then what is it going to say next, right? And she said, Kaniti, I've acquired ish, a man, et Adonai. She says, I have acquired Yod He Vav He. She just thinks that she right then brought forth this promised seed that God had just said, and she attributes it as to that she is bringing forth Yod He Vav He into the flesh. Now, that's incredible in that it's right there in Genesis chapter 4:1. You have the woman who heard from the mouth of God itself. And that's all getting back into the event. This is in the mind of Moses,
Right.
who's writing this.
Yeah.
That he's saying that she said, I have acquired a man et direct object indicator, not with the Lord, because that doesn't even make sense if you want to think about it. She didn't acquire a man with the Lord. She acquired a man with Adam, right? Because Adam knew his wife, right? And she bore a son. So you say, I've acquired a man at my husband, with my husband. It's not what it says. It wouldn't even make sense. You wouldn't even translate it that way. It says you acquired a man at Yod He Vav He, the divine name of God. She acquires right there. I would say is that the only place you see something like this? Okay, yeah.
You're saying a lot. You're saying a lot.
Okay, sure.
And it's
Go
very
ahead.
meaty. I'm
Yeah.
sure you all can empathize with that. So let's dive into the et
Okay.
direct object indicator.
Yes.
So I know the King James version is translated as, and this is Genesis 4:1.
Yes.
And Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain. And she said, I have gotten a man from the Lord.
So she's making a play off of the name Cain, right? Which means acquisition or to acquire. So she says, Kaniti, I've acquired a man at, right?
Yes.
And people are going to translate it as with, but it's not with right there. The word with, which is et, it has 2 points underneath the aleph, not 3 points underneath the aleph.
Okay.
If you haven't, so there's 2 words in Hebrew, right?
Right.
They look the exact same. You're looking at them in a Torah text. If you don't have any vowel pointing, what are called nikudot, if you don't have any nikudot, right, you can read this word 2 ways.
Okay.
Once you put the nikudot in there, and the Masoretes they preserved the tradition of how it was said and how it was to be read, that they put the sigol there,
Okay.
right,
In fact,
underneath the aleph. You're saying it's a direct object indicator, not a sere, which is 2 dots, right? And again, I get this is all Hebrew
No,
grammar,
this is
but it
important.
appertains
this
to
is scholarly.
the conversation.
Scholarly.
Yeah.
What I want to do is I want to just get a bigger version so you
people
can
can
point,
see it?
point
Yeah,
it,
sure.
point it to us, and then I can show
Yeah.
everyone on camera.
Sure.
Where we're at, if you're just joining the discussion, is questions regarding the incarnation is one way to think about it.
Does the Tanakh teach anywhere in it that the Messiah will be God? Right? I mean, that's how I'm understanding the question and framing it. Is that a fair?
That's absolutely
Okay.
fair.
Yeah. All right.
Another way of saying it is can Yod Vav He become made flesh?
Yeah.
But if you wouldn't mind,
Yeah.
show what is this?
That's
Sorry.
Hosea.
4, right?
Yeah. 4:1.
Where are we?
You're at 4:10 at the beginning of this page. Right here. All right. It says, and the man, right? That's how you would translate that. The and ha, the Adam, and the man,
Yeah.
yada, knew, et, hava. So you see how et is being used there. Et
Yes.
is not translated, but you can see the vowel point that's underneath it. It's 3 dots. Looks
Yes.
like an upside down triangle.
Right.
Right? He knew et chava. So the man knew, direct object pointing to what it is that the verb is acting upon, right? He knew Hava, Ishto, his wife,
Right.
right? And she conceived and she bore et.
Yep.
See it? Same
Yep.
thing.
Yep.
She bore. So there's your verb. She bore et Cain.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Vatomer, and she said, Kaniti, I have acquired ish, a man, et
Yeah.
Adonai,
Okay.
the four-letter name of God.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So if you're going to translate this et differently, then if you're going to say this means with right here, then it means with in every other spot
Okay.
up here.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Now, no translator's comfortable with this translation, even though that's exactly what it says. Right? But
Right.
she's saying right there, I have acquired a man, Yod He Vav He.
Yeah.
She thinks she's bringing into the world Yod He Vav He. She thinks she's bringing into the world this particular seed.
So I want to show you all.
Yeah.
I don't
It's-
see it.
No. That's where I lost it.
Four. This is 4.
Yeah.
And then, so this is the et right there.
Right here.
So the et, the direct object indicator, is used 3 times in this verse.
Right
And
here.
what I'm arguing
See the
is that
Yod He
it's
Vav He?
used the
Yeah.
exact same way every
And
time.
that's the et. And that's the Aleph Tav.
Yes.
Is that right?
Mhm.
How's, if you will, how is that different than, say, the Most High made 2 lights, the light and the dark? Because it's the same et. It's the same et, making 2 lights, referring to the sun and the moon, right? So we don't consider the sun and the moon to be one and the same, right? There's 2 separate.
So no.
I've received a man from God.
Except
Maybe-
except you have to
Couldn't it be a
supply.
man that is separated from God, not a man that is God? That seems to be a possibility here. There's another.
So-
He made an expanse and separated.
Yeah. So
Right?
so right here, if we
So
will.
it can also be against. It can't only be together.
So
right?
no. What I'm saying is grammatically how the et is used in Hebrew is it is a direct object indicator. So it tells you what the verb is acting upon. Okay.
Okay.
So like I hit Charles.
Mhm.
All right. So that's the direct object.
Okay.
I hit Charles. Yeah. So that's basically the concept. I hit Charles.
Hit
So
is the verb.
in Hebrew,
Mhm.
if you're going to say this, the direct object is going to tell you what it is that hit is acting upon. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in Hebrew is the only language that has this little feature, this phenomenon, but it's
Okay.
important and it's helpful in interpretation sometimes. So I, right,
Mhm.
subject, verb, hit, Hebrew word, et, Charles.
Okay.
Okay. So if you were to look at, say Genesis 1:7.
Right.
So, and he made Elohim et harakia. He made the expanse.
Mhm.
So this is your verb right here.
Right.
Va'aseh, you're right. And he made who? Elohim, right?
Right.
Et the firmament. The firmament. So he's telling you. So it's the exact same. Because
Okay.
what I'm trying to say is what the woman says right here is she says, I have acquired a man, Yod He Vav He. What I'm trying to argue is that's a spectacular saying to occur
Okay.
right there in Genesis chapter 4.
Sure.
And it's so much that what the writer of the Torah does, what Moses does is he lets it stand, right?
Mhm.
He lets it stand. Now, sometimes he editorializes, right, and tells you different things. For instance, when they raped Dinah, right? Which thing ought not to be done in Israel? He editorializes, not good, don't do this. So sometimes he breaks in on a historical account and says this. Now, am I arguing that Cain is Yod He Vav He? No, I'm not.
Right.
But what I'm arguing is there's
She
an
believed it was possible.
yes. What I'm arguing is there was an expectation of it as early on as Genesis chapter 4, verse 1.
Okay, so then just to be clear, your argument, Josh, is that there is an expectation of an incarnation that is thoroughly grounded in one way to say it is the Hebrew mindset,
In the Torah itself.
but it's really Moses's mind.
Yes.
And so,
I don't think that we can say for certain that it's grounded as an expectation in Moses' mind.
He can
because
say that I'm making
documents-
the argument.
Because he documents that Eve had that belief, because she also thought it would be okay to eat the fruit, right? She also thought, she had a lot of
Sure.
ideas that weren't great.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
That's a good point.
So we can't say that, she's not the prophet of the Most High. She's not a witness. I mean, she's a witness in as much as Israel is, but Israel falls into apostasy.
That's right.
over
Now,
and over.
but now here's where, pardon me for using the term hermeneutics, but I love it.
Sure.
What I love talking about. You
Yeah.
taught me a lot about this. Making sure to not get too enthralled in an event in the scriptures, one, and two, that the scriptures things were written aforetime, written for our learning, so that 3,000 years later, when you read the text, and if you can get to where you're reading it in the original text, it's written so that you can learn from it.
Sure.
It's not about diving virtually into the event, because I used to do this. I used to go into the event and say, well, how does that make any sense, whatever. But the point was really that Moses is conveying something to the critical reader who has eyes to see and ears to hear.
Well, I agree with that, but I think it works on both levels. It is a historic account.
Sure.
And it has to be. And if it's not, then
No, that's
there's
true.
no reason to read it or believe it.
And I don't think Charles was trying to argue that it's not a historical account, but what we can say is that it's not simply a historical account.
Yes.
The author has a meaning that he's trying to convey. So he picks and chooses from history. You know what I mean? He could talk about all of the sons and daughters that Adam and Eve were to,
Sure.
all of their offspring. He doesn't.
Right.
He only mentions a short little story about Cain and Abel, and then Seth that comes along afterwards, and so
Sure.
and then he moves on. You know what I mean? So he's picking and choosing from history in order to develop an idea,
Sure.
right? And so we could ask, what's the idea? I think the Messiah is the idea that he's developing. Clearly, that's what I think.
Sure.
So. But I don't think that's too far away from what Judaism says. But at least to say, and we can go back to the textual argument in Genesis 4:1. But to say, you get. Maybe I should just ask questions. Do you understand my argument?
I do understand
Okay,
your argument, and I can say that's. I don't have the scholarship to rebut that at this point.
Yeah.
It seems to me that there are some other possibilities. Just cursory overlook of the subject matter. Like you say, it can be with, it can be from, it can be against, it can be, and I don't have the expertise to dissect that at this time, right? So I can concede that point for now. I'm not going to say that I agree with it,
Sure.
But even if it were true, that does not prove that was what God told Adam. Right? Because Eve believed something does not mean that was what God told Adam.
And this goes back to Charles's point, and this is the distinction that I think hermeneutically I'm constantly trying to help people understand. There's no possible way for us to understand what God told Adam.
Right.
You don't have access to that. That's an event that happened. All we have is a document.
More than us.
Yeah.
He told him more than he told us.
Of course. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're making this assumption.
Assume. Right.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
Sure.
We could. You could also make the opposite assumption that he told them nothing else than what is explicitly said, right? But we have an argument from silence, and we can't really prove one thing or the other.
Sure.
But what I'm trying to say is, what we do have is a record of the account. And so in the record of what is said, the author develops his meaning. He gets you to see things. And I think, you as like a student of the Torah, that he's constantly begging. He's constantly throwing questions out there for you. There's anomalies in the text that force you to say, what?
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
you look at it, you say, okay, I wasn't expecting Eve to say this right here. Reading in the Hebrew, I've acquired a man. Eve thinks she's bringing Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh into the world right now. You know what I mean? But I would say that is at least to me, right? And you could go back and look at other scholarship and see what you want to see.
I'll tell you, immediately my mind says that it could be the word that's later interpreted as anointed, right? It could very easily.
What could Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh?
No. I'm saying that when the Most High speaks of David, he calls him
Mashiach,
right? And that word is not in existence yet.
Yeah,
right?
we do find it in the Torah.
Right, but not in the garden.
No.
Right. So we could very well be seeing, Eve saying that I'm maybe she knows that there's going to be much more to come, and this is the man who God has chosen to lead his people. Right. It doesn't necessarily mean everything that me, having read the New Testament, want to thrust upon that.
Look,
Right?
I'm all for
Right.
not back reading into it. So
Okay,
this is
that's
just
right. All I
just
can
first point.
Right. All I can do
Yeah.
is say that Eve at that point possibly believed that she received something special in Cain from the Most High.
Well,
Yeah.
so I'm not. So Eric, I just a little bit of a pushback on that. I'm not sure that's even. So this goes back into the hermeneutics, right?
Sure.
I think that if we were to ask what did Eve think, or what was going on in that world event at that point,
My assumption would be no more accurate than his.
But
That's what you're saying.
no. What I'm saying is that it's actually a non-question,
Okay.
and it's a non-question because the point is not to, again, virtually penetrate those events in the text.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible.
Okay.
The point is to look at the grammar,
Mm-hmm.
look at the letters,
Sure.
to stay historical critical.
Sure.
When you look at and so when we open the Torah, that's what this is. This is a
Right.
Torah.
Sure.
He has a Torah.
Right.
You have the digital Torah. Is to say then this came from the mind of Moses.
Mm-hmm.
What is Moses trying to get me to see here?
Okay.
And so
Sure.
I think, and this was a paradigm shift for me, again, hermeneutically speaking and biblical interpretation wise, because it actually freed me up from trying to interject my mind into something that there's no way to penetrate it.
Sure.
So to keep myself honest about it, thanks to Josh, was to say, look, what is Moses penned all this?
Mm-hmm.
It came from his brain,
Okay.
right? I mean, maybe that's a whole
He's
other-
inspired.
Moses is inspired.
It came through him.
It came through him.
Through him.
There you go. Thank you for
I
that.
can go with that.
Thank you for that. It came through him,
Okay.
and it came in this shape. It
Okay.
came in this
Yes.
way.
Yeah.
So then when I really want to get critical about it, I can't, and I know it's fun. I mean, because I love sort of like fiction writing and trying to think about and extrapolations and possibilities in a text. But what's and perhaps even that's the more quote unquote sexy aspect of interpretation. But what's not sexy is what do the letters say,
Sure.
right? Like
Right.
bare knuckles, meat and potatoes.
Right.
These are what the letters say,
Right.
and I have to do something about this, right? And so I guess and I hope maybe I'm not trying to prove your point or anything. I'm just trying to say that, when I see that and I see the Yod-Vavhe, which by the way, the Masoretes would wash themselves every time
Right.
they would pin that down.
I shiver a little bit.
No,
every
for
time
sure.
you-
And when we first met, I wrote it in ancient Hebrew. And he's like, "Hey man, don't ever do that." You probably don't remember that. But no. With all due respect to the Most High, we're not trying to defame him or marginalize him, or whatever. But these are the letters in this particular scripture. As the Tetragrammaton, there is the Aleph Tav, and so what do we make of that from an incarnation perspective? This is a Hebrew document. This is Moses inspired writing. Is that not?
No, I'm not saying it's not important.
Yeah,
That's not at all. It's
Right.
definitely important. I think that it's important to understand. Like I said, I don't have the scholarship on the point, right?
Right.
It's never been brought to my attention, so I appreciate that.
Yeah,
that's
That's
right.
Well, that's the point that's why we're here.
Yeah. Yeah,
Looking at it myself.
because that's definitely something I'm going to study.
Yes.
Right? Because, like I said, my cursory overview just leads me to the position that there could be other possibilities than
Sure.
she thought
Yeah.
she was bringing in the God man.
Well, and again, all I'm trying to say is,
May I interject?
yeah, please, of course.
Just to say that, when do we want to take a quick little break?
Wait, just
and
getting
then go and
started.
then go into the Because I know we had a few questions we wanted to hit on.
Oh, okay, sure.
Hey, before we do,
Go ahead.
Can I?
Yes,
please.
Because
please.
Yeah, you opened up with. Let's see if I will wake up. You opened up with a portion of Matthew 5, and I didn't want to get too far away from it to not address it.
Okay, excellent.
Where?
Matthew
5:17.
Where you said, "Think not that I come to destroy the law, but I come to fulfill the law." Right. So, and in that you said that you don't think that he is trying to do something other than teach Torah.
Well, I know he's not trying to do something,
But that's what the
because that's
text says.
exactly what he says.
Right.
Okay, that's what he says. But then I want us to look at what he does after that, right?
Okay.
Because he says in 17 through 20, this is King James Bible. This is
I'm
what,
looking
you know,
I'm
right?
down with
So-
look. King James is good enough for Moses. It's good enough for me. No, it's-
Yeah.
Right. So
And by the way, the King James actually. No, I gotta tell you, the King James actually corrects the Masoretic text.
Yeah.
So,
no, go ahead. I'm
All right. So let's see. So 17, he talks about think not that I come to destroy the law of the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill, right? And so on and so forth. Now look at verse 21. It says, you have heard it said by them of old time, thou shalt not kill. And whosoever you shall kill shall be in danger of judgment. But I say to you, that whosoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of judgment. And he goes on and on. He says, turn the other cheek and, let walk with him a mile and all of this stuff, right? And this is a imposition on this is a changing of the law, right? By any standard, this is a changing of the law. If you were to look at, if you were to take this to Moses, right? And Moses said, hey, you know what? I understand that you said, an eye for an eye, but you know what? Nah. I think if somebody slaps me, I should turn my cheek the other way. Moses is going to say, that's not what the Most High said. That's not what was given to me when I went up the mountain and you were down here trembling and I came back down and you said that my face shone with, he said, that's not God. That's what Moses would say. Right? He'd say it a lot more forcefully. He'd be a lot more angry, right? He would be, that person who said that would probably die, right? So that's a big thing. You can't tell me what you're not going to do and then do it.
So I would say that's the entire point of what he's saying. And if we're careful, he's going to tell you what it is that the Torah actually teaches. So let's see if I can notice that. Matthew 5 is part of a sermon that he gives, so it goes from chapter 5 through 6 through 7. It's all one sermon. But what's his initial premise in it? His initial premise that he says at the very beginning is, do not think that I've come to destroy the law of the prophets. So if we are going to read his first point after he tells you what his sermon is about, and we come away with thinking, well, yes, you are, then I say you've clearly misunderstood what he's trying to say. So notice what he's going to say. He's going to say in verse 20, after he says, look, whoso, and again, to go to your point, these are his, I'm in 5, you could start
Matthew
in
5,
19.
Okay.
He's going to say, whosoever shall break one of the least of these commandments and teach men so, he shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever shall do and teach them the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So I find it, look, he's either the worst preacher that ever lived, okay, who's going to say something and immediately go back and contradict himself, or you might have misread what he's getting at. So let's see what he's actually getting at in verse 20. He says, for I say unto you that except your righteousness exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. Now, how many people did you just mention right there? Scribes and Pharisees, okay? So he just told you, I'm not trying to counteract Mosaic teaching.
Right.
I'm trying to counteract rabbinic teaching. Now notice that's exactly what he says, because he's going to say in 21, you have heard that it was said by them. Who is the them referring to? In verse 21, it's only, who's the antecedent of them? You've heard that it was said by them of old time. Not you've heard it said by him of old time, like I'm talking about Moses. He's not talking about Moses. Exactly.
Yeah.
In the context, he said, you've heard it said by them of old time. you shall not kill, right? Now notice, hear me out,
Okay.
right? His point is this. His point is your righteousness has to exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. So that ought to be the thrust of what he's saying. So the point of every one of these things that he's going to say is going to be about having not only external righteousness, but internal righteousness as well, right? And so all of his points go to this. When he points to rabbinic teaching, not Mosaic teaching, rabbinic teaching on Mosaic teaching. You've heard it said by them of old time, thou shalt not kill, and whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. In fact, I'd say find that verse for me in the Torah. It's not in the Torah, that whole expression, although it's in rabbinic writing, right? So you've heard it said by them of old time, you shall not kill, right? And whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say unto you, so contrasting his words with rabbinic words, which is how the actual initial audience understood his sermon at the very end of it in Matthew 7. It says, and it came to pass when Jesus had ended these sayings, that the people were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one having authority and not the scribes, which you know, because you've read rabbinic writings and stuff, that all the scribes base their authority and all their teaching on a list that goes back to, right? Moses had the law, he gave it to Joshua gave it to this person, all the way down into the men of the great Sanhedrin, who gave it to and they have a genealogy of interpretation that goes back to Moses, right? And this is what they call the oral, allegedly.
Yeah.
This is what they call the oral Torah, right? And so they don't ever make any statement, right, that isn't attributed to, in the name of Akiva, right? And then they say this, and because you can trust Akiva because he heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend who, so on and so forth, right? But Jesus' teaching is this, right? Your righteousness, and he's saying that this is what Moses is saying. So let me see if I can make this point, right? Because I think you'll actually agree. So it's okay for me, according to the teaching of Moses, to, as long as I don't hate my brother in my heart all day long. That's what Moses teaches, right? Moses teaches you can internally hate people while externally, right?
No, I don't.
I would argue that that's what the Cain and Abel story is all about. I would say that is Moses' teaching, right? God comes down to Cain and says, look, you're not doing well. What are you doing, right? Don't you know that sin is crouching at the door? But what? He lets the hate foster, right? And thoughts and things like this, they turn into actions and they work themselves out in the world. And so, and all of Jesus' other examples, right? You've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say unto you, you shall not look on a woman to lust after her. So you're married, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, it's okay for you, right, to be faithful physically to your wife, but all day long, you got, stuff going on in your mind. Just ask her if that's okay with her, because I'm pretty sure it's not, right? It's also not okay with the Most High, right? He wants us to be faithful with our spouses and so on and so forth. Be monogamous, unified, both in body, heart, mind, so be one flesh,
Right. Absolutely.
So I would say that if you look at every single example that Jesus is giving, every single one, it all has to do with righteousness cannot be merely external. And this is a lesson we all need to learn, but it can't be merely external, but it must penetrate and even go inward.
Sure. And I know you want to make a point. I want to encapsulate everything you're just saying, if I can, which is that, and if I'm understanding you correctly, that Jesus is not necessarily and in no ways negating the law, but actually setting a higher standard than at least the Pharisaic
rabbinical standard.
I would argue that he's saying that this is what Moses teaches. I would argue that he's saying that Moses teaches righteousness has to be internal, not merely external, right? Even though you have things that are given in an external fashion, right? That there are higher principles in the Torah that govern, right? Not only external life, but internal life.
And Christ was articulating the internality of what the Torah perhaps wasn't doing explicitly.
So here's the thing. That's a beautiful point, and obviously it's pretty foundational to Christianity, right?
And I would say to Torah. I would say this is what Judaism teaches.
Sure,
Judaism wouldn't argue with this.
Sure.
Okay.
My point is that you're setting up a dangerous literary precedent regardless, right? So that when we later get in Galatians and they say that everyone who believes in Christ is the descendant of Jacob, this is what gave them license to do that.
I wouldn't argue with that because Galatians is written before Matthew.
Sure,
So
sure, okay.
yeah. So
Paul,
that's not
absolutely.
technically true. Okay, yeah, sorry.
But what I'm saying is that you're establishing something, a literary precedent, both here and right, and then later in Hebrews, and then later in, you know what I mean? It's all throughout the New Testament of undermining Torah. And it's kind of like, if we sit at the table, right? We sit at the table, you guys come, you're guests at my home, and my dad's at the head of the table, and all I do is I make jokes about my dad, and I say, oh, but I'm just kidding, he's a good guy, right? And, oh, I'm not really talking about my dad. It's busting your chops, Pop, right? That's what's happening here.
I'm wondering if the analogy is actually this, Eric. It's we're all at the table with your dad. He's at the head, and instead of cracking jokes on him, it's you're reinforcing the paradigm that he's been teaching, but then upping the ante for everyone at the table.
No, because the thing is,
but isn't that what Christ is doing?
No, because he didn't say that your righteousness has to exceed Moses and the prophets. He didn't say you have to exceed the Levitical priesthood. He didn't say that. So the standard has always been the standard, right? He's saying that this new rabbinical ideology, this Talmudic Babylonian influenced, is not. That's not.
Correct.
That's not Moses. I would argue that's what he's saying.
Correct.
That's right.
And
so
I think we have agreement. And I would also say, look, I take issue with the vast majority of how the Christian church interprets Paul and Galatians. And I don't think any of them contradict Moses. I don't think any of them set aside Moses. I get, you give me the big eye.
Yeah,
you know? No, I get like, okay, I'm over here on a fringe position, but I think it's actually pretty clear if you listen to what the Apostle Paul is saying in any like we talk about historical, grammatical, like looking at first century and trying to understand Paul in light of Paul instead of Paul in light of the Catholic Church and how the Catholic Church has presented Paul.
Sure.
I think you come away with something vastly different.
Or Paul in light of Christianity. I mean, because Christianity produces a type of Paul. That
I agree with you if you're saying modern Christianity.
Correct.
I wouldn't say early Christianity. No, I think early
right.
Christianity.
Right.
I mean, like
we don't have a sense of early Christianity.
Well, yeah, we do.
But,
the book of Acts.
But the modern Christian church doesn't have a sense of early Christianity.
Well, I mean, it's in the text, But again, this is a foray away from like where does the Tanakh establish,
right.
the deity of God?
Sure.
So I'm welcome to step back.
I didn't want this point to escape because you addressed
sure.
it. I think that it sets a dangerous precedent.
Okay, I will give you that you think that it sets a dangerous precedent. I would argue though that it's real precedent. Like for instance, you mentioned an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You know what I mean? So where in any legal system, right, in Israel's history, do you see people get eyes poked out and you think the right thing to do is go and poke out the other person's eyes? You know what I mean? Like. Well, you recognize that even in that very law itself, you're using a type of language that is not, that if you interpret it hyperliterally, you've made a mistake from the get-go. Does that make sense?
No, I don't think so. Because
so if I poke out your eye,
sure.
The right thing to do, what squares everything, is you poke out my eye.
It is a justice. It would be a justice. I would not be recompensed.
It's true,
but it would be a justice, and the Most High is just, and He establishes that. He goes through.
But is it just because it's equitable?
It's
equanimous.
No, I think that.
Like, why would it be just?
It would be just.
Like for instance, if somebody crashes into my brother's car.
Sure.
Then I should go and crash into his brother's car to make it fair. Because that would be a car for a car, right? And that would be an idea. But what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to show you that this is.
But if you stole, you would repay 7 times.
Exactly.
Right? Versus if you stole, and that's if you got caught. If you didn't get caught, then you pay back 1 time. If you decide that you come to yourself, and, you know what, I gotta, right? So there's skills. I mean, there are tiers.
Yes.
Right. And the tiers follow a line of justice that also resonates with the heart of the man. Right. If I turn myself in, there's a lesser penalty than if I'm caught.
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And that's Torah,
I'm with you, man.
right? And so by that standard, when you say not an eye for an eye, you're saying that the Torah standard of justice is nullified.
See, I'm not saying that. All I'm trying to say is that
I'm not saying you. I would argue
sure.
that the New Testament is saying that.
Yeah, I would agree.
Well, I mean, I would argue that the punishment ought to be commensurate, with the offense, right? So, for instance, if I poke out the eye of the king's son, right?
You're going to die.
Well, I would say that's anti-Torah, right? That goes against
Absolutely.
Torah because
I agree.
the punishment ought to be commensurate. Or
Correct.
I'm not saying this word correctly, so I'm going to
Commensurate, yes.
Yeah, So look, you can't say I broke your arm, therefore you take my life. Okay,
Sure.
that's what I think the Torah is saying. So, and I would say, but that's clearly what it's saying. That's how it's interpreted in terms of like historical interpretation. You know what I mean?
But not just. I mean, as a matter of how it was implemented by the kings, right? I mean, saw the women disputing over custody of the child. Solomon says, "Cut the baby in half." Obviously, he's not going to cut the baby in half.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
But it is a truth finder.
Yeah,
it is a
Definitely.
truth finder.
Yeah.
And if that standard of justice wavers, then you cannot find truth.
So all I want to do in kind of elaborating on what you're saying is to simply say that when Yeshua says, you've heard it said an eye for an eye, but I say unto you, turn the other cheek, right? Mm-hmm. He's not like we all, when we get to certain laws, feel free to kind of explain ourselves in a greater way, right? You don't just let it stand and say an eye for an eye. You know what I mean? Well, that would mean it only applies if there was an eye and a tooth and a tooth, and you know what I mean, so on and so forth. But there's clearly a broader application of this particular law, But it's also within the Torah itself. If you do damage to me, right, I don't have to exact that punishment on you. And we understand this in terms of all law, right? If somebody comes and breaks into my property, and I catch them breaking into my property as a younger kid, you know what I mean? The cops say, you want to press charges. I have the right to push to the full extent of the law, whatever I want to for this person breaking onto my property. I also have the right to say, I don't want to press charges. Just, you know what I mean? Learn your lesson. Don't do it again. So on and so forth. That is within law, and there are, yes, no, you disagree?
I agree
go ahead.
that is in our law, but we just read in Deuteronomy, said, if your brother, the son of your mother, come to you and entice you to serve after false gods, he says, don't go with him, don't hide him, kill him. And there's not if you don't do it, you know what happens? You get killed too.
I'm with you, but I would say that we
don't have that discretion with Torah.
I'm with you. But see, there's a difference between, right? For instance, what somebody does to society and what Scripture commands in terms of a specific case individual like this.
Right,
and
but we're talking about Torah. We're not talking about
with you.
Society and specific.
Well, I'm talking about Torah society. So
okay.
that's what I'm trying to get to. So I mean only in Torah law. Only right. That's all I'm talking about.
So do we have that? You find that freedom in Torah law to not obey Torah to the extent that you want to?
Yeah, because I think that this particular law, when you get, and this is in Exodus 21, right?
Okay.
So in Exodus 21, when you get to the whole principle of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, so on and so forth, these are laws that are meant to limit the amount of punishment for a particular transgression. That's the purpose of the law. The law is to say an eye for an eye. That is, say, if an eye was taken, you can only require the value of an eye back, not more, right? You can't value more than this. That's the point. You can't say for a tooth, right, which is less valuable than an eye, right? Because you took my tooth, I get to take your eye. Torah says no, right? Okay. But it is not prescribing. Right? In that particular instance, it's not prescribing that this is what has to be done if it is done to you, right?
Okay, wait, that's very important.
Yeah.
It's when you say it's not prescribing, it's not prescriptive.
No, it's saying that if you are going to exercise the ability to punishment, the punishment cannot exceed the crime. It is not saying that one must mete out the exact just
I get that.
punishment.
I guess what I'm asking is, and this is new for me now that I'm thinking about it, are you then saying that there is a sense of flexibility in Torah.
Yeah.
Now this is
Yeah.
very important.
Yeah.
Very
It is
important because,
important. Yeah.
I got the Hebrew, in my head.
Yeah.
I've never heard, and I'm not disagreeing with it. I want to flesh that out a little bit more, because it sounds like you're saying that, using Exodus 21, that there is a limit to the type of vengeance or revenge.
No, I don't dispute that there's a limit. I agree that that's
there's a hard limit.
Right. The hard limit is an
eye for an eye,
a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life.
Yeah.
But I think
I can't kill your whole family because you killed.
But what Josh is
right.
saying that's novel to me,
right, is
is
that I
that-
can do less.
or you don't have to
Or
do anything
nothing.
at all.
I don't see that.
You're
Yeah.
you're arguing, if I'm going to understand you correctly,
Mhm.
and I want you to make your point, but are you then going to say the opposite, that no, you have to do this? If I poke your eye, you have to poke my eye out.
Because that's
You
literally
have
what
to.
it says.
You have to.
For you not to do that in this instance, if you're going to take a hard line on it, you have to say, if I poke out your eye, then according to the Torah, you have to poke out my eye. If I break your tooth, you have to break out my tooth. Instead of saying that, like how I think it's always been interpreted, right? That there has to be financial compensation, except for in the case of life for a life. But there has, and even sometimes in the case of life for a life, and we can go to Exodus 21 and see this, but there has to be financial compensation that is commensurate with the value of the crime.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating.
That's a
Yeah,
That's
I've never heard it presented like that, right? And confidently,
Yeah.
I would need to study that.
Sure.
I'd need to
Fair
study
enough.
that.
Well, that's fair, man. That's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I
Like,
don't.
right.
Yeah, I don't think that that's what the scripture says, because it's not. What if? I don't want to play with.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no.
Now I'm curious.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, we're all friends,
Yeah.
right? We're all friends. This is just like, hey,
No,
this is just minds trying, iron sharpening iron, right?
This is
This is
true.
That's exactly right.
I've learned quite a bit myself just during this
Um,
dialogue, so I appreciate of you brothers.
I don't. To say that the punishment for law is not prescriptive. When we look at the nation of Israel over the entire documented history, what we see is the punishment of sin. And I think we're standing on a very precarious point. And you bring up that we cannot say eye for an eye must be, but if that is the foundation, I think that the burden of proof in Torah must come from you.
I'm willing to do it. I mean, I think. Go ahead.
But I would ask that you allow me to prepare a position
Sure.
that defends it based on Torah,
That's cool.
because I don't. By that logic, you can say that much of the 613 law, there's a law, but there's no real penalty for law. Or the law is the penalty is based upon the grace.
Well, are any of them
And it's
prescriptive?
No, I think lots of them are prescriptive,
Okay.
but I'm trying to explain
No.
in a particular situation.
because he starts off by saying, "You've heard them say that thou shalt not kill," right? Which is they said it, but they didn't say it first.
I understand.
Right?
But the nuance that I was trying to bring out
Mhm.
is that you know what generally gets brought up is like, see, here's Yeshua. He's saying this is what Moses said, but let me tell you what I'm saying.
That is
But
what
that-
Moses
that-
said, though.
Yeah, that's fine. But that's how Yeshua's sermon is generally presented. What I'm trying to bring out in the nuances, Yeshua is not trying to argue against Moses. He makes that explicit in the introduction to his sermon. The nuance is he's trying to argue against rabbinic teaching, or I should say rather, kind of one and the same, but Pharisaic and scribes teaching. So, and if you miss that nuance, then you make him say something he's not saying in the text. He's not saying that over and over again. He's constantly trying to say our righteousness has to exceed, and what he means is internal, not merely external. Both. He's saying both, not just one. That's his point. You can give money, right? Go like you know, don't be like the person who goes to give his alms and sounds the trumpet before he does it, you know, and throws it in there. All right, look, you got to give. Everybody's got to give. It's Torah prescription. Give, right?
That's not the Torah prescription.
Yeah, you do. Yes, you have the tithes.
The tithe was only for a landowner.
You have all of Israel.
Israel in captivity gives them tithe.
All of Israel, when they go into the land, has to give a tithe. Also, no, you.
When they go into the land, they are landowners.
For instance,
It says, all the land of the Canaanites I will give to you. So they're landowners, right? When they're in captivity, they're not landowners.
There were taxes and other things like this that were levied on the people that related to corporate worship, for instance, like the half shekel tax, different things like this, were given to the temple, you know?
Well,
even in captivity?
No, not in captivity.
The only time that you have
is what you're saying, when they're in captivity, you're not
correct. There's no
prescriptions.
Right. There's no tithe.
Okay, I'm not technically trying to argue against a specific tithe or anything like this. What I'm talking about is the Torah mandates taking care of the poor, right?
Right. And what do the poor to do?
Whether you're in the land or out of the land.
And what about the poor? Are the poor also to tithe?
Well, if you're going to tithe from the produce of your field, right? No, but say for instance, right? You even have the Levites and stuff. Do they have any fields? No. Are they to tithe?
Sure.
Yes, they tithe to the high priest. You know what I mean, and so on and so forth. So you at least have like one clear instance where people don't have land, but they're still expected to tithe.
Well, the Levites are special in that they're sustained by a nation that is sovereign, right? That doesn't apply to anyone today, right?
This is into the weeds of
Sure.
of what I'm trying to say. My basic point is, if you look at Yeshua's sermon on the Sermon of the Mount, he's trying to say, when you go into the temple or when you pray or when you do anything like this, don't do it in a way that just makes it external. Make sure you do it in a way that's internal, right? Internally true. That's what I'm trying to say.
I don't refute that is a point that you can take away from it. I won't even refute if you want to say that that's the primary point. But what I will say is that there is an error in the way that it is presented, and not by men, but the way that the writer of Matthew presents that writing, in that if we accept that wholesale, then we have accepted a literary tool that allows us to undermine Torah.
I mean, I would just say I disagree, but I mean, what is it?
Maybe you can develop that.
Yeah, what is it
more
precisely in that sermon? And again, this is still far away from our argument.
Yeah,
so if you don't want to get into this, then that's fine with me too.
Sure,
but it's a little bit farther away from us going back into the Torah and establishing the idea. If you want to, I think that it's curious.
Yeah, I think that it's important in the interest of defending Torah against the brother who says, "Come serve other gods." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in that vein, I think that when we read an eye for an eye, like I've stated before, that's foundational, right?
I agree with you.
Right, and I'm not ready to 100% say that it is a judicial imperative that we take that eye.
But you would at least feel the question of like, how can you even say that? How can you say it's not a judicial imperative if you say this is exactly what it says?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's what I'm saying. Right. You at least feel that question, right? You are already stepping back away from it a little bit, right?
I'm stepping back away from it because I value truth more than my position.
Sure.
Right?
That's awesome.
I value truth more than my position. So I'm not going to hold to a position that I can't yet defend. Fair. But that does not mean I don't intend to defend it.
Fair.
Okay?
Respect it.
But I can tell you that the logic that follows is a very slippery slope. And that is why I am compelled to hold on to it.
Okay. Fair.
So
I want to talk less.
no. We're almost at 2 hours. Believe it or not, we're at an hour and 53 minutes.
I'm probably coming up on a hard stop pretty soon.
Yeah. No. I think now it might be a good time to kind of wrap things up a little bit. Obviously, we covered a tremendous amount of ground, which was, I think, part of the purpose of coming together is to kind of rub up against each other in an iron sharpeneth iron sense. Minds bringing disparate viewpoints, their own sense of scholarship, but also the point that I really want to drive with regard to every serious discussion I have is to be honest and sincere about critically looking at one's own presuppositions, premises, and worldview. I think that is the most important thing for any intellectual or for any leader, for the head of a home, and anyone that is worth their salt is to step back and objectively look at why I believe what I believe. How do I know what I know? And insofar as we're courageous enough to walk down that perhaps it is a slippery slope. Maybe it's scaling a mountain. However you want to think about that, it's worth it. And so I really enjoyed listening and engaging with you all. So it sounds like we may want to do a volume 2 or a round 2.
Perhaps it's good to just focus on those points of contention that we've already kind of uncovered.
Right.
And just fleshing that out a little bit more.
That's absolutely right.
I did have one question, but it's probably, I know we have a hard stop coming when it comes to the prescriptive aspect, because I was looking over and as we're talking, is it possible that if somebody does the eye, somebody gouges out your eye, while it's still between the two of y'all before it goes to it, what I'm reading is saying that you would go to people who are going to help you resolve this issue. Perhaps once it goes to those people, they have to prescriptive go to what this text is saying. You have to take that eye out if it goes to them.
Right.
Maybe could that be the nuance that just amongst the people, it's like, hey, I'm gonna forgive you on that. With that, from y'all's perspective, I just want to hear a brief segment on that.
So you're saying that between two men, you can grant me mercy
before it goes.
You can seek justice or you can seek mercy. I think I'm not prepared to even say that, because between two men, I don't have the latitude to say, hey, you know what, James wanted me to, go, have my kids walk through the fire, but you know what, James is my boy. You know what I mean? I can't do that, right? I got to uncover you, right? So we have to find those gradients, right? We have to find a clear mosaic prescription for this does not have to go to, and it can be settled among you amicably. And if we can find that, then absolutely, I'm going to go with Torah.
Okay. So you're saying it open to the fact that it could be that before it goes to people who have to make that judgment, where they perhaps have to be taken as prescriptive. I have to mandate your eye because you took his eye. Perhaps when it's still on the local level before it goes that far, it's possible that I can be like, I'm not going to take your eye.
And I would say that's just to answer it from what I think Yeshua actually brings up this exact point, like right after he says, agree with your adversary quickly while you're on the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver you to the judge and the judge deliver you to the officer and you be cast into prison. Verily I say unto you, you shall not by any means come out from there until you have paid the uttermost farthing. So I mean that's Yeshua's point. So Yeshua recognizes, and I think all law does, that you get to a place in judgment where you can't say like, okay, now I'm sorry, I changed my mind. No, look, you want to go to court, you want to stand before the judge has to execute the law according to what it says. I still don't think that means you're going to get your eye poked out.
We can't equate man's law to Torah, right? My ways are not your ways.
I understand, but what I'm just saying is an analogy.
Because we think this, then that must be true of the Most High and His law. That's not the way we think. We've got to look at His law as the standard. So what all law does is not pertinent to the conversation of what Torah does.
And I'm with you on that. I'm just trying to say by means of analogy, right? Mm-hmm. Not saying that we have to then say it's one for one, but just to say in terms of a way that helps us to understand the point If, for instance, somebody breaks into my property and the law says $200 fine for trespassing, right? And the cop catches him on my property and he says, "You want to press charges?" Right? I can say yes. And we go to the judge and we can do $200 fine, right? You're found guilty, pay the fine. You don't get any option at this point. But I also have the option to say at that point in time, no, I'm going to forgive, right? That option exists. I think that option exists even within the Torah itself. Now,
That's
now,
what
what,
Adam said.
now, what I want to say is it's not. Okay, look, did David kill a man?
Yes.
What's the punishment for death for killing somebody?
Yeah, that he died.
Okay, what punishment did Yahweh execute upon him?
Well, he wasn't able to build the temple.
Oh, is that death? Because you just said a life for a life.
Well, his son did die.
Okay,
So it was a
but
life
hang
for a
on.
life.
It says a life for a life, right?
Right, and his son did die.
So, but
David.
yeah,
We're talking about David.
Yeah, David's son did die.
But David didn't die.
David didn't die.
Why?
No.
what I'm trying to say is that wasn't
Do we have time
executed.
to?
No,
so
I get that. I was just opening up. But
My question.
Yeah.
I just want to hear y'all both perspectives on that. That was what I was.
Sure.
You know.
But also I will say,
That's a good question, though.
well, no, it's great, and this is what I wanted to say regarding law. My brother's a lawyer, so we get into this a little bit. But
Sure.
but ultimately, studying Torah, studying actual securities law,
Okay.
and studying law
Mhm.
itself,
Mhm.
canon law, whatever kind of law, common law, what it all has in common, I think, including Torah, is the hermeneutic that is that there is an exercise of hermeneutics regarding laws in general, including Torah. And this is where we get into, as you know, the word hermeneutics is the science of interpretation. It's really about understanding, clarity,
Sure.
bringing up the nuances. I will say in closing, because I know we could probably keep it going, but I do want to close with a scripture from the Tanakh. Proverbs 25 and 2. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings is to search out a matter. And I think that's what we're doing here. And I really want to thank you all for joining us together and for being here as a part of a beautiful conversation and fellowship, and one that I hope would continue. So with that, everyone have a great night. Thanks for tuning in. It looks like we have
Thanks for
three
tuning in,
loyal.
everybody.
We had at least two, but three people that were courageous enough to climb the mountain and slide down the slippery slopes.
Thanks,
that
Mom.
find ourselves.
Yeah.
I'm sure my wife.
So until next time, we'll catch up with y'all. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
And that's a